We acknowledge the lands of the traditional custodians across Australia. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' continuing connection to land, water and sky country. We acknowledge the wine regions and hundreds of different nations around this continent, and the ancient soils on which we stand and grow. From the Wadani saltwater peoples of the Margaret River in our west, to the East Coast Sunrise people of the Yuin Nation, and the Southern Island and Saltbush peoples of the Nione peoples of Tasmania. Today and always, we pay our deep respects to the custodians, those who went before and those who will follow, as the knowledge holders of tomorrow. This is Australia.
So hello everyone, welcome to this session for McLaren Vale and welcome to the beautiful panel sitting in Australia in McLaren Vale, all joined up, late evening for you, midday for us. I just want to start saying that we have a few housekeeping points. It is very important that you realize we have a chat section, we have a question and answer section, and we have a handout section. So when it comes to chats, it would be great to see everyone saying hello to everyone. But keep your questions that you will ask us in the question and answer section. And then you have this section called handouts. And if you click on that, you will see that there is a booklet that has all the information about the wines. And you will also have a fabulous map, which we will go into more detail later on. If you have questions concerning prices, importers in the UK market, in the German market, or in the Swedish market, Laura will be sitting backstage and answering that as well. When it comes to the questions, I'm not sure about my multitasking qualities, so I might want to keep them until last so that we can make sure that we get all the answers answered at the end. And if we do have questions that we don't have time to finish off, we will definitely make sure we answer them before you'll have them by the end of the day anyways. My background with McLaren Vale goes back to, like, now I'm admitting how old I am, but late 1980s. I was backpacking around Australia and stopped at Chateau Reynella and tasted some pretty good wines, I think. But what I remember the most is port. Can you believe it? Port wine. But if you look at the historic plantings of Shiraz and Grenache, that was definitely used for the ports. Another session that I did about 15 years ago was visiting a guy called Steel Panel, and he was showing me a wine which was co-fermented Shiraz with Riesling, and I thought, wow, this guy is bright, because he was questioning, why is everyone running for doing the same, copy-paste recipes of Shiraz Viognier? If you look back at why did they actually do this up in the Northern Rhone? Well, they needed flesh to put flesh on the bones of Syrah. And with Viognier, that really works. But then he said, why do we chase Viognier when we need acid? So he co-fermented with Riesling, which I thought was absolutely splendid idea to question, not just copy-paste. Then I have done 7 years of judging in Australia. And one of the key personalities that I've run into has been Corina Wright of Oliver's Taranga. And she showed me Fiano that really knocked me off my feet. And I thought, wow, this little area, McLaren Vale, what is the identity of the place? What are they really known for? During a master wine trip about 5 years ago, the key tasting in McLaren Vale was very much focused on these international alternative varieties. And I was thinking again, gosh, you are so diverse and you're trying to be everything to everyone. But when I started realizing that the research that these guys have done into finding 40 different geologies in the region, then you are definitely suited to be diverse. And that's when I started taking you guys really seriously again, saying, wow, it is not strange that you find, I think the number is 78 different alternative varieties. About 3 years ago, I was invited to be an international judge for a competition called the Australian Alternative Varieties Wine Show. It was 101 varieties on show, and I could not believe how so many of these varieties actually had their home in McLaren Vale. And they were some really, really stunning wines. If I look at the identity of McLaren Vale, I think probably there's a little bit of a little brother syndrome, because Barossa is the more famous, and they have made themselves very, very famous with also a beautiful old vine scheme, with having very, very old historic plantings. If you look to the north, you have Adelaide Hills, or to the northeast, you have Adelaide Hills, which is a cool climate area. A lot of focus on Sauvignon Blanc, on Chardonnay, cool climate Shiraz, totally different from when we look at Barossa. And then you have Langhorne Creek, a little bit further east, and not only being a great sourcing area for a lot of different varieties, but also focusing on Malbec. So you are surrounded by a lot of different characteristics and like different areas that are so specialized in different things, and you have made it, you carved a niche out for yourself with being alternative. And I know, Melissa, when I asked you the other day, I said, what about this alternative varieties? You had another word for that. You called it something differently. Do you remember?
Appropriate.
Yes, exactly. Appropriate. Yeah. And I thought that was actually so wise to say, because what you have been doing, you've been carving out a future for yourself with respecting that there's a global warming. And also what I've really understood while doing this research is that you are one of the strongest leaders in sustainability and in organic and biodynamic growing. And when we were discussing this, I realized you are more of a boutique wine region. You're not the big companies. You work there, you live there, you grow your vines and you make your wines, but you also raise your families. So therefore, it's a very natural link to taking care of your place and your region and making sure that sustainability is such a strong thing. So I would like to throw over the ball to you, Melissa, and just ask you a little bit about this with biodynamics and organics, because when you told me that the stats for organic and biodynamic is like almost 40% of the plantings in McLaren Vale is organic and biodynamically certified, which is very impressive. I don't know if there's any other region in the world that can actually match that. So, and also sustainability focus. If you can just bring us into that, please.
Certainly, yep. If I may, I'd just like to pay our respects to our traditional owners. So we support the cultural, spiritual, ecological and economic renewal of the Aboriginal peoples of this place, the Willunga, Yurta, Willunga country, and the Punkara clan country of the Mullawura Mayu.
Okay, so, I'm sorry, I rushed you into talking, fine. And then I
no problem at all. So so nearly 40% of the McLaren Vale region has our vineyards are certified organic or biodynamic, which you're right, it probably is the largest percentage of all the regions in Australia. And I think there's a reason for that. And it's the climate here, it's where we're placed. So our proximity to the coast, we have the benefit of cooling sea breezes. We're not really a region prone to frost. and we generally don't get rain at harvest, but I better touch wood because we did in 2011. But so it has been known to happen. But yeah, I think it's a relatively easy region to grow grapes organically without too many pest and disease problems. And another thing is that McLaren Vale was the founder of the Sustainable Wine Growing Australia program. And that is a program where wineries and growers are focused on improving their sustainability initiatives by benchmarking with other growers. So we were the founders of that particular program. It started here back in the 90s. And more recently, it's been launched across the whole of Australia. And over half of the vineyards in McLaren Vale are participants of that particular program. So yeah, there's a very strong focus on sustainability, regenerative agriculture, best practice, however you want to call it. There's a lot of that going on here in this region.
If you look into your own, your own vineyards and your estate, and Gemtree being organic and biodynamically certified, the last 10, 15 years, what have you learned from the effect of global warming, and how have you adapted your sites, your vineyard sites, to actually counteract this? What we can't stick our head in the sand anymore and say it's not happening. Just run us through a little bit of what you've done on your estate.
Sure. So I think that the effect of climate change is that there seems to be less predictability about what's going to happen from year to year. Because my dad will say, well, vintages always used to start at this time and finish then, and maybe he's got a bad memory, but certainly since I've been working in the industry, there has rarely been one vintage the same as another. So I think you have to be prepared for any event really, and for different timings. So that's one thing. Also, I think that we can safely say that it is getting warmer, and that our heat waves are becoming more frequent. We've had drought conditions to deal with very recently, and also perhaps I think, although we have had a few years with good rainfall, but we're also getting sort of storms and things like that can create problems as well. So what we're I know what I've been looking for varieties that are suited to warmer conditions, so that they can withstand heat waves better, and tolerate droughts better, and still have a really good flavour profile. So moving away from traditional varieties, things like perhaps Chardonnay and Sauvignon, which were varieties that were planted here in the 80s and early 90s, and looking more for varieties that are suited to just warmer conditions. Because we know Wine Australia has done the Climate Atlas, and we know that I think by 2040 our average temperature will have increased by 1.5 degrees Celsius.
So, for example, when you told me that your Chardonnay plantings, you've experimented with different varieties, and Fiano has been one of the ones very successfully grafted onto Chardonnay. Have you got any other favorite varieties that you've seen that really works well in your soils?
Well, I've got some Albarino coming on for 2022. So we harvested a very small patch this year, not enough to bottle, but it had really high acid, and so we're pretty excited to see how that comes on. And also we have actually planted a few of the more traditional varieties which we didn't have in our portfolio, like Grenache and Mataro. So or Mourvedre, the later ripening red varieties that I think they can actually tolerate heat really well, and obviously there's a slight risk with those being later ripening of getting rain during harvest, but as I said, so generally we're pretty lucky in that regard.
Right. I think there's quite a few people sitting in that have 6 wines in front of them. And I have as well. And you guys probably have you poured any of them yet? So I wonder if we should maybe go into, since you're already connected, Melissa, with talking about biodynamic and organic and everything. The first one we're going to be tasting is a Vermentino, and then the next one is a Marsanne, which has been made by you. So I'll invite those that have the wines in front of them to start tasting, and then maybe you can talk us through the Vermentino and what makes Vermentino such an interesting variety. Because when I've been thinking about Vermentino, it's not very often that you run into Vermentinos apart from like the Tuscan versions and then the islands like Sardinia, Corsica, maybe more. And Vermentino very often is a variety that maybe doesn't speak of so much place. It's like more like a drinkable and fragrant and happy and quite straightforward. But I've tasted, when I was in Tuscany now just a few months ago, I tasted beautiful Vermentinos that were like 15, 20 years old, and they did age extremely well if they are made in that way. But most of the Vermentinos around in Australia maybe are made more to be like quaffable, happy, juicy, pretty, but not for keeping. But this version, also coming from Chalk Hill, I know that name doesn't just come from Chalk Hill being created from nothing. There must be quite a lot of chalk in this area. Do you think that this wine has got, like, it's starting to show some more typicity of place, or bringing out a characteristic of Vermentino that you find interesting, that could be, you know, leading the variety in a direction? Because some people I've heard said Vermentino is the Sauvignon Blanc, like the New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc of Australia. Would you agree with that? Or do you see that Vermentino has a future with becoming more, you know, more interesting, and also for long-term thinking?
Well, actually, it's interesting you should say that, because when we first tasted it, I said if you tasted this wine in a blind tasting, you'd be forgiven for thinking that it might be a Sauvignon Blanc. And yet on the palate, I thought it was quite different, very citrusy, but with really lovely long acid. And when I was talking to Renee Hirsch, the winemaker, and I said, why did you decide to make a Vermentino? She said it's because it holds its acid really well, particularly in a warm climate. And I think that this wine really demonstrates that. And also that Vermentino is a slower ripening white variety, so it can develop those really lovely fruit flavours even in sort of extreme heat while holding its acid. Renee said that this is mainly, it was all in stainless steel, but they did do some lees stirring to give the wine a little bit of texture. Yeah.
And if you would move over to your wine, because you've been more famous, I would think, for Fiano than Marsanne, but I know that this wine that you're making is a one-off. So it's something that just happened, didn't it? And it turned out so incredibly well that it's here to represent you today, which I find extremely interesting.
I guess that is the special thing about this wine, is that it is a once-off. And the reason for that is it doesn't actually come from our own estate vineyards, this wine. It's a parcel that comes from another biodynamic grower in McLaren Vale called Paxton's, and they didn't want to make a wine out of it, and so they contacted us and said, "Would you like it?" And so really, it was very much an experimental wine that just turned out very well. So it's I guess it's your typical full-bodied aromatic Marsanne, and it's got a bit of texture to it. Personally, I prefer higher acid wines, but for people that really like textural wines, I think this has got some really good texture and body to it for a white wine, and that really lovely sort of honeysuckle aroma. Yeah. So I think perhaps it might be something we see in the Gemtree portfolio again down the track, but if we do, it won't be for quite a while. But it's certainly been a popular wine, and we only made 1,500 bottles. So for those who managed to grab one of those bottles,
we're lucky.
Yeah.
Now, the first thing I pick up in this wine is that incredible waxiness, the textural quality of the wine. It's like it has beautiful brightness of acidity, but at the same time, it's like that texture is very unique. But you also said that this grower, he was growing everything like the way you would have done it as well, with organic and biodynamic principles.
Yes.
Do you see, or what have you seen in your white grapes when it comes to the way they have responded to that viticultural actions that comes with organic and biodynamic? Because when we talk about the reds, usually you get stronger tannin profile, but what have you seen in the white grapes that this type of viticulture, because you're the viticulturist, like super into this with growing, I'm sure you would have seen something that has changed from being conventional to going over to this way of managing your vineyards.
Yeah, I think so. White grapes tend to be a little bit more prone to disease, in particular powdery mildew, and I've seen. So we used to have quite a few problems with powdery mildew when we were running the vineyards conventionally, and over time it's all but disappeared, really. And I just think there's more resilience in the vines. They're healthier, and so that then translates to healthier grapes, perhaps better skin condition. They're the sorts of things that I'm seeing, and perhaps a bit more tolerance to drought conditions as well.
And do you think that by using, have you, like with this wine, have you used the skins like in maceration to getting a little bit of that texture out of the skins?
No, so this was matured in oak. My husband Mike is our winemaker, and he told me that this was matured in the oak so that the grape phenolic sort of binds to the tannin in the oak, which sort of draws those phenolics out of the wine and makes it more pleasant, but still gives it a creamy texture.
It's quite interesting when we look back like 10 years ago when we were criticizing wines that had phenolics, because it was like the thing was that don't get phenolics into white wines, because then it will give you that little bitter twist and it will give you something that you can criticize. And how this natural wine movement have really made things so different, and how we look upon phenolics in whites, that it's actually quite pleasant to have a little bit of that, that bitter twist and
yes.
giving a bit of tannin. So, I mean, this one has texture and it has a really good, it has beautiful structure, not only by the acidity, but also in a textural way. So well done. I hope you will plant some of this because he uprooted it, didn't he? The grower.
Unfortunately, yes. Yeah.
So this is the one who got hold of these. Like, there's never there's never a second opportunity for a next vintage, is it?
No,
Shame.
that's
No.
it.
Okay, so that's our two whites. Let's move over to the reds, and I'll invite Sky to be the one to talk about Tempranillo and Sangiovese. And when I talked to you a few days ago, I was saying that Grenache is one of those varieties that we will use it in explaining the different ways the variety expresses itself in the different subregions, like in the north, in the south, in the hills, in the flatlands of the region. Because with these alternative varieties, we haven't got, or you haven't got enough experience, or you can't say that we've got Sangiovese planted in all these different subregions and we know exactly how it reacts to the different soil types and being closer to the ocean or being higher up in the hills. So therefore, we will guide you through the way Grenache as a more transparent variety today expresses itself in these different soil types. But first, we will talk about your Tempranillo, which I found extremely interesting when I was tasting it, because we had a chat saying that Tempranillo might have been one of the first varieties that became maybe even a little mainstream in Australia. And suddenly you find this one going, wow, I was very impressed by this wine. So please tell us, Sky, what made you choose Tempranillo, and how have you treated this wine, and what makes Tempranillo interesting again?
Yeah, so Tempranillo for me is a very interesting variety to play with because you can take it in obviously two different directions. You've got those younger, early release styles, but then you can also go towards those bigger, bolder, more structural styles. This one comes from a vineyard that's about 3 kilometres from the coast. The elevation is about 70 metres above sea level. So the site that it's on, we get some of those cooling breezes from the ocean, which moderate the temperature a little bit. So I find the tannin structure in this is really lovely. Like it's definitely built in the vineyard rather than in the winery. I think it's got a lovely balance variety itself between lovely fruit and also texture and structure. So this wine, we brought it in. The fruit was in magnificent condition in 2020. When it was picked, it looked amazing, and the yields were down. So I think we got some excellent concentration that you might not have seen in other years. The ferment, we did a wild ferment with a 4-day cold soak, and then we kept it on skins until after it was bone made dry. So it did get a little bit of extended skin contact, just to basically to soften the tannins. So you find that the longer you leave the wines on skins for, the tannins, I guess, soften and develop, and they basically get bigger and precipitate out. So structurally, it finds its place a little bit better than if you were to press it early, and they're quite, the tannins in Tempranillo can be quite aggressive. So I was looking for that balance between fruit and the savoury tannin profile.
What I really enjoyed when I tasted this wine yesterday evening, I thought, wow, this is a wine with a lot of confidence. It is confident without being too big. It's confident in being like super fresh and very vibrant, but it has a beautiful perfume, and you can really tell that you've allowed the variety to show its strength and not try to build it up to become a big wine. Do you think that looking at how other producers have treated Tempranillo, and looking at the history, because there has been, I don't know if you agree with me, but there has been a lot of Tempranillo that maybe have been made into more generic wines, and they are so they're respecting, or how do I say, they are taking in oak easily. And if you look at Rioja and Ribera del Duero, I mean, the biggest criticism you would have against those wines would be that they put too much oak into them, and they make them too big of a too big of monster wines, and then not really showing the varietal typicity. But I think in this wine, it's like you really respect the varietal typicity, but at the same time, it's not a wimpy wine. It's definitely, it's got attitude and it's got everything you need, but you can't really say that it's been you haven't got a lot of makeup on the wine to make it impressive. It's impressive in itself. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of Tempranillo and its tannin structure. I think that's why it lends itself to being a bit more serious when you need it to be. I think it does have a tendency to crop heavy in the vineyard, so I think if you can control that, that's part of the battle.
I'm multitasking now. I see I get really clever questions here now. Simon Woods asks, how difficult is it to get a variety of clones of Tempranillo and other new grapes as well? Like how difficult is it to get hold of new grapes? You probably want to mention the family of of bringing in all these varieties into Australia. They've done an incredible job.
Yeah, there's definitely a couple of leading players that do invest and bring in varieties from like internationally. The Charles family is definitely a big one there. They've definitely, I think they're probably the leaders in some of those alternate varieties, but there are other people doing it as well.
Yeah, from a Tempranillo perspective, Willunga have done a really big clonal trial, Madeleine. So I know for us in our vineyard, we've been able to plant 3 different clones of Tempranillo now, because like Sky was talking about, we're looking for style around it, and that gives options around making single vineyard varietal Tempranillos, or making a regional style and bringing in some of the other elements of the region at the same time. So there's been a lot of growth in Tempranillo clones in the country.
We have another question from Pablo Orio, who says he wants to know which clone of Tempranillo this will be. Do you know, Sky, which clone this would be?
I don't actually know. It is a vineyard that we buy fruit from. We don't grow it ourselves, so yes. I don't have that information, and I'm so sorry.
Maybe we can get hold of that and answer you, Pablo, afterwards. I think that would be, it's good to know, definitely. Okay, should we move into to the Sangiovese?
Yeah.
And then we can also show the map, if we can have the map to go through. Oh, look here, perfect. And I think for everyone that gets that map on, you have on the top right-hand corner, it says full, so you can actually enlarge it, which will be helpful because it's very detailed. And Sky, if you would now switch from Sangiovese, which is going to be the next one, so we don't need to taste it straight away, but if we can, through the eyes of Grenache, because you are the Grenache master in the team here, if I look back on Grenache and McLaren Vale, I've always in the past said, why are they so big? Why are they made bigger than they need to be? And I think in the last few years, we've had beautiful examples of Grenache coming out of McLaren Vale, which I think is also one of those key identity strengths of your region. Now, when you've allowed Grenache to be pretty and fragrant and elegant and having all these beautiful characteristics that it has naturally, but it has been treated a little bit more like a Pinot or a Shiraz with more extraction, more oak. And we know that Grenache cannot really take that amount of oak that Pinot and Shiraz can do. And it doesn't suit itself to be late picked in the same way. So then when we decided, let's see the region of McLaren Vale through the eyes of a Grenache. Could you walk us through what happens to the Grenache from, if you go from the northern side, more towards the east, towards the ocean? just to bring us into the picture of what happens in your different soil types of your region, please, Guy.
Yeah, so obviously Grenache is a good one to look at because now the styles that we're making, we don't tend to have a lot of oak in them. So now that we're picking them earlier and they're less ripe, we're seeing probably a little bit more of that site expression in them. So we're beginning to, I guess, get to know what these subregions do to the Grenache in terms of flavour. McLaren Vale's obviously got the ocean on one side and then Mount Lofty Ranges on the other. So that also creates these little micro sort of blind little sections throughout McLaren Vale, which are quite unique. So there's a lot of influences that change what a site, and a lot of influences to each site, which will impact what we're getting out of them. The majority of the Grenache that I look at does come from the northern section of McLaren Vale. We focus a lot on the Blewett Springs subregion, which has got sandy soils and a little bit of elevation. So we tend to see really bright, lifted red berries, really vibrant and expressive aromatics through these wines, and some nice fine-grained tannins. And then we also take Grenache from Clarendon, which is even further north, and this is more of a loamy sort of soil type, and we get a more, what I would say is a more savoury tannin profile, and some, I guess, less red berry and more floral and I guess flower tones to the wine, which is really lovely. I think structurally across McLaren Vale, you see different things with Grenache. Seaview, Grenache from Seaview can also be structural and have some really lovely tannins. I think when you're heading down south, so on your map, if you head just, where is a good spot? So I guess if you're looking between the red spots that say Chalk Hill and Coriole, through that sort of area, I find you're getting quite a juicy sort of mid-palate as well as some of that structural tannin. So yeah, when you put them all together, you get a really nice picture, and it's very sort of the blending component. But yeah, in talking to Duncan from Coriole about Sangiovese, they've actually got quite a lot of vineyards of Sangiovese that he was very useful at explaining what those sites do through that variety as well. So I think the more we plant these varieties and get to know them around McLaren, I think we'll see what impact they have on other types as well, which will be cool to see.
If you would just put us into context of going from the Mount Lofty, the hills that connect you with Adelaide Hills, and then straight out to the ocean, what would the distance be, just to make us understand the size of the region?
I won't make Melissa do the estimated distance. Good question. It would be maybe 25 k's, I think, between the ocean and the foothills, I'd say. Yes.
So I will, let's see now. I will remove the map now if you're okay with that. So then everyone can go in and look at their maps individually if you want to in the handout section, if you want to see it more clearly again. But if you think of the diversity of your region, I mentioned before, you have identified 40 different geologies. You have soils which are in between 15,000 years old and 550 million years old. And then the distance is like 25 kilometers from the hills out to the ocean. And if you go from north to south, what would you say? Is it like 30, 40 kilometers or something like that?
Actually, I think I overestimated the distance to the ocean looking at the map now. It's probably more like 10 k's across and probably 25 sort of north-south-ish.
So this thing of when I sometimes think that someone is like a region is trying to focus on too many things, like trying to be everything to everyone, and then you realize that within this small area you have this incredible diversity. It's not odd that you are trying to figure out what you can do best and how you experiment and see where do you hit the sweet spot in terms of matching place and variety, because you're really, really so diverse. And it could be both a strength and a weakness, but I think in your case, it is an incredible weakness, but it's also like being a child again, isn't it? To try to figure out, how to express yourself with these new varieties. And I know when I had a chat with you guys, you said that it feels like you're all starting at the same place. If you go back looking at Grenache and Shiraz and Cabernet and all these other varieties that has been a benchmark or like a signature for your region, then you have always got to learn from the previous generations. But at this stage, you're all starting at the same point and you're all learning together, which probably have brought together your region in a very beautiful way, like everyone working on the same varieties, but with the same level of expertise and experience.
Yeah, it definitely makes the division very collaborative, I think.
Yeah.
And like you said, I think younger winemakers coming up through the ranks are on a level playing field when it comes to a lot of these varieties, where we're all in the same boat, which is a really good place to be.
Yeah.
We actually have what we call focus vineyard days here in the region, where growers are invited to visit another grower's vineyard, and you can get up to sort of 50 people attending, and it's just all about looking at what that particular grower is doing on their vineyard, and we can all learn from each other. So yeah, it's a very collaborative community, and we all support each other, and we all learn from each other too, which is great.
Yeah, good family spirit. So let's talk about your Sangiovese, the Coriole, or not your, but the one you're supposed to talk about.
Yeah.
Please, Sky.
So Sangiovese is obviously very important to the Coriole story. They actually started planting Sangiovese in 1985, and they're probably largely responsible for the popularity of Sangiovese in Australia. I think they have definitely invested heavily, and it's pretty impressive how early they went to have Sangiovese vines that are 36 years old. They'd definitely be the oldest in the country. We're certain of it. I had a quick chat to Duncan from Coriole to have a bit of a chat about the vineyard sites that they source this from. They do source from 3 different sites, and there's 12 to 14 different parcels within those sites. So they're working with between 7 and 8 different clones for this. So the diversity in that alone is pretty incredible. Duncan was saying that generally what they see in terms of site versus clone, the biggest impact they have on flavour profile is in fact the site rather than the cloning type. So on the map, if you want to look at it again at some stage, there's 3 different sites on there marked as Coriole. There's one to the top left, which is their Coriole site, their home block, which is Terra Rossa soils over limestone. This site, they see a more savoury structural stock wine with some earthy notes. And then they've got a block in the Willunga section, which is those sands I spoke about, same as Grenache. So they, again, similar to Grenache, will see a red fruited profile, like really bright floral wines with those nice tannin. And then they've also got the block down on the map, which is near Willunga. And through this section, he said that they've got a more of a medium tannin profile. So Willunga's got alluvial fan clays and sand and gravel, so a bit of a mix in there. I guess sands that have, migrated down the Mount Lofty ranges over all those years. And in this section, they see some more blue fruits and still quite a bright profile. So they're making it sort of similar to how you handle a Grenache, really. So they're not looking to have a huge oak impact. 7 to 10 days on skins in combination of open fermenters and static fermenters, and then some time in some old French hogsheads before bottling after 12 months. So I think in terms of emerging in different varieties in McLaren Vale, Coriole's definitely led the way for us.
I want to add to this, because I went through. I'm a sucker for keeping notes from wine competitions, and I kept my notes from the tastings of that alternative wine show with those 101 varieties, and I could see that I was very impressed with a lot of the Sangioveses, and I was very impressed with the way they have allowed them to be very fragrant. And when you think of not making the wines too serious, because your vine age is so young that you can't really go that super serious with them. But at the same time, Coriole are the ones that have been growing Sangiovese for such a long time. And also relating to your comment of that the clonal material is not that important for them. They see that the site is more important than the clonal material. But I think that probably is related to the age of the vines as well, because if we look at Pinot grown in different regions, the younger the plantings, the more the clone speaks its language. And maybe it's the same thing here with the Sangiovese, that the site speaks stronger through the age of the vineyard. Do you think that's a logic? Do you think that is can you draw a line between that?
Yeah, there's definitely that potential. I mean, as the vines develop and that root structure gets bigger, I'm assuming they're drawing more from the geology than they were when they were younger. And also, I think the fruit getting more concentrated in general as you get into older cropping years. That probably helps as well.
Great, beautiful wine. I'm impressed with that fragrance, giving you even like roses, and it gives you a little bit of orange zest, and it's like super fragrant, but still on the palate, it's. I mean, the tannin structure is really there. The acidity is there, and the wine has all the building blocks in place, and it's quite concentrated, but without losing that beautiful fragrance. I think this is well done for showing varietal typicity, but also respecting the site in such a beautiful way. Or the sites, because they're a blend of 3 sites, as you said. I think it's time to move over to Malcolm. There's been a lot of girly talk now for a long time. We need a little bit more of a masculine voice here to crack us into the last set of reds. So we have a wine from you, which is a Nero d'Avola, and then we're going to finish off with a Primitivo. And while you're pouring, I'll read the question from Adam Titterton, who says, with the impact of the climate you discuss, have you planted anything specific that will counter the effects on a larger scale? So he probably wants to know if there's like small experimental plantings, yes, but is there anything that you feel has really, really made an impact, and that you have dared to plant in higher acreages in your area?
That's a really good question. Thanks, Madeleine. What we do in our family vineyards, normally with the new wave varieties, is we look to plant around about ½ hectare to a hectare at a time. Some of that's around availability of really good planting material. Mostly it's because we're trying to match the right variety with the right site. It's a big investment because for most of these varieties, we're not grafting. We're planting rootlings. So it takes a long time for development, And I think for that investment, both in time and cost, and obviously the region works really hard on promoting these new varieties. So we want quality, we don't want overplanting, and we don't want overcropping, from the wrong site. So we feel like a hectare's a pretty solid place to start. And then if it works, and the Sangiovese is a great example, is probably more so than planting it all on one site, we're looking for regional and site character to come through from different vineyards in the region. Now, some of us don't have that advantage in that we have multiple vineyard sites, but we're pretty sharing mob. So, you can always source a couple of tons from here or there for use in your own wine as well. So Nero's a great example. I'll be honest, it's been a very popular wine for us. We planted in 2010, but we're still at the 1 hectare. And the reason for that is it allows us to really focus on the balance in the vineyard and the quality of the wine. And I don't mind selling out of it. I don't think we should be scared with all the different varieties that we've got. I'll put my sales hat on. We say, okay, I'm sorry, we've sold out of Nero, but we've got Touriga, or we've got Aglianico, or why don't you try one of these other varieties? So, I guess biodiversity and balance is what we're seeking for in these new wave variety plantings. And it doesn't need to be on scale, I don't think.
If you would be given another 10 hectares of property, like enlarging your land, which variety would you go for?
I'd plant 20 new varieties, Madeleine.
Would you? So that's the answer, Adam.
I think I've really enjoyed the chat around white varieties tonight. And I think, McLaren Vale's done an excellent job introducing the red varieties and promoting this really fresh, light to medium bodied, easy drinking style with these. We've had a good run at rosé as well. I think by making it in a more traditional sense and bringing through varietal character in rosé. And that's now tending towards people getting interested in new white varieties. And the thing that white does is that it balances vintage out for us as well. So it's not always a vineyard balance thing. It's actually a timing thing across vintage for us, in that it's actually nice to not have 50% of the fruit from the region come in 3 weeks in the middle of vintage, but you can start early. It's sort of time and space in the winery as well, and it means that you can focus and give care and attention to each parcel. So, I think, and we're seeing a trend also from a consumer and trade perspective towards real interest in whites. Again, it's really suiting our lifestyle and our cuisine here as well.
If you look at Nero d'Avola and then you think Sicily, like in the past, you used to find Nero d'Avolas that were piggybacking onto like Shiraz or Cabernets, because they were wanting to help to introduce these varieties to the wine drinkers who were like a little bit afraid of finding something they had no clue what it was, and better hang it on the back of a Syrah or Cabernet. But you don't really need to do that for your local market, because they're more excited to actually find these varieties rather than to find another Shiraz or another Cabernet. So you're in a very good spot with a curious domestic consumer base as well.
Yeah, I think we try and pay homage to where the varieties come from. Varietal character in the wines is really important, but we make it for the Australian palate as well. So it's quite a hard thing to achieve, actually, all the way through. But Nero is such a strong variety in its flavour and personality, and I think that's the other thing that comes through in these wines, is that we can make it in our McLaren Vale style and still have varietal character coming through. I love this sort of dusty sort of roads feel about tannin profile and the finish on this wine, but it's still really juicy and kind of pretty and light to medium bodied at the same time.
I was mentioning before this thing about daring to go into the co-fermentation topic of like what everyone did at one stage was Shiraz Viognier, and then Steve was going like, yes, let's do Riesling instead because we need acid, we don't need fatness to our wines. You've also done a little bit of experimenting with co-fermenting different varieties. Can you just give us a little thought on what you've done and the results of that?
Yeah, the one I really like that we've been doing for a number of years is Grenache Touriga. So that's actually field blend, so pick same day, crushed, co-fermented together, and it's pretty hard to get the picking day right because of, the varieties do ripen at different stages, but I think that's where the co-ferment works really well. It's certainly a very pretty wine. It's a big juice bomb in the mid palate, but it's got freshness to finish as well. And even with all that, you can still see the varietal character playing off each other really nicely, but quite harmoniously at the same time. This year we had a little fun one where we had first crop Montepulciano and Greco de Tufo, and we did the same with that. So we field blended that and co-fermented it, and we really like this this white, like you've been mentioning, Madeleine, prettiness and freshness that it brings through the back palate and allows the red wine to be really full of flavour as well. But we tend to find that makes sense when you're combining red-white varieties or the two red varieties from similar home countries or regions. It makes a lot of sense in that way.
Yeah. Now this Nero is, I think it is a stunning example of just giving you all that beautiful perfume, and it's so fragrant and still so fresh and so lively, and it has a lot of charisma. It's like a really charismatic. You just, for me, it's a happy wine. It's a wine which it puts a good smile on my face. I can see how it's probably not made for keeping in the cellar for a lot of years, but that's not the thing. But do you think in the future, do you see that these varieties with age will be more suitable to trying to coax a little bit more of like longevity or complexity? Are you going to go that route, or do you think you're going to stay, friendly, happy, varietal typicity, just the beautiful expression of the fruit, healthy fruit grown in beautiful soils? And what's your vision on that?
I think these lighter style wines with good natural acidity and laid off on concentration and oak, particularly not sort of dried out, they age really quite beautifully without a lot of complexity in the wine. This Nero reminds me of the first Nero that we made in 2013, which was just a red wine. Really, it just had enough flavour and body, but it's drinking beautifully now because of the natural acidity and the Nero character and that McLaren Vale freshness that we've been able to bring through in the wine. So, for me, I don't think we have to really worry about ageability in our wines at this level. I call this a Tuesday night wine, which implies what it is. I think it's to be drunk upon opening or with a little bit of food or without food. They're just lovely sharing table wines, and they're interesting to keep back if you can keep your hands off.
So that leads us into the last wine, and I know that we are just about to finish off as well, so timing is pretty good. The last wine is a Primitivo, and it is an 18 vintage. So We have seen now wines from 20 and 21, and this is the one that we suddenly have a little bit more age into, but it's also the one that has been more seriously treated, I would say seriously, with length of time in barrels, because it's got 18 months in barrel. And Primitivo, if you think of Primitivo or Zinfandel, do you see this Primitivo as a clonal material from more Puglia, or is it a Zinfandel type of clonal material? Do you know?
Yeah, it's a style, Madeleine. So I spoke to Kevin O'Brien from Kangarilla Road about this wine, and certainly the aim was more the Puglia style. By the way, they do make what they call Zinfandel as well, and that's a heritage. That's what he calls the heritage block for this block of fruit that makes the Primitivo. So there's no difference here apart from vine age and also the way that Kevin's made the wine, and he wanted to be mid-weighted, juicy in the mid palate, but still, quite dark and savoury through the finish. And I think the one thing we haven't sort of touched on much tonight is vintage character as well. And we all know that 2018 was a particularly dry vintage, so we got quite a bit of natural concentration in the fruit, which I think this wine's showing as well. But it's delicious to drink after the Nero as well. Sort of sucks all that dubiness out, and perhaps this is more of a food wine as well.
For sure. I think we've seen a great diversity between the different reds. I mean, they are night and day, but still representing very much their varietal, but also. If you look at the whites, it's super impressive to see the whites, and we only had 2 tonight, or today. There's so much more we could have shown, and mentioning the 78 varieties that are grown in McLaren Vale, we could have had a really long lineup. But I think this is a good cross section of what we can see from what you have been busy with in the last. 20 years, 15 years, all of you. Maybe Sky, you haven't been around that long at your winery. You've been there maybe just how many years?
Only 2 years at Willunga.
Only 2 years, yeah. But you're getting your...
Not as excited.
And I also said that we'll keep all the questions till the end, but I managed to. They were not that many thrown at me, so I could actually bring them into the discussion in a good way. So I hope everyone is happy with the wines who have been tasting these wines together with us, and that you're happy with the contribution from these incredibly bright individuals sitting on the other side of the world and seeing the end of the evening where we are just seeing the start of the day. But thank you so much for joining us, to everyone who's sitting out there, but also thanks to McLaren Vale. And thank you, Wine Australia, for also trusting me with leading this discussion, which I think we could have continued another 2 hours easily. But thank you so much, and cheers.
Thank you, Madeleine.
Cheers to your diversity.
Have a good day.
Bye.
You too. Ciao, ciao.
Cheers.
Cheers. I have no one to cheers with.